I'm going to show you how to negotiate your workload so effectively that saying no to your boss actually feels like a promotion.
Well, that is quite the massive promise to start us off.
It is, but we are absolutely going to deliver on it today. Listen closely. In the next 15 to 18 minutes, you are going to learn how to use persuasion principles to protect your time without burning bridges.
Yeah, and the source material we're using for this deep dive, it fundamentally restructures the power dynamics of professional communication. We're focusing on 11 specific persuasion tactics from the text, but zeroing in on the critical few that alter how you manage capacity, handle incoming demands, and, how you perceive your own professional value. Because for most of us operating in a high-stakes environment, the default survival mechanism is just, well, it's just working harder.
Right. Okay, that was the promise. Now, let's move to our first point. Principle 1, the trade-off technique. Because the text identifies a major hurdle right out of the gate, which is that instinct to just freeze when you're handed an impossible workload. Most people, when they hit that wall, they just say, I can't do this.
And the author is highly critical of that exact phrasing because of the psychological friction it creates. The second you say, I can't, you instantly position yourself as the obstacle between leadership and their objective. In the theater of a corporate environment, you've basically just cast yourself as the uncooperative roadblock.
You triggered their defense mechanism immediately.
Exactly. You force them to either fight you to get the work done or retreat and find someone else. Either way, it diminishes your value in their eyes.
But, just playing devil's advocate here, based on the source, sometimes I can't isn't a defensive posture or a bad attitude. It's just a mathematical fact. If you literally do not have the hours in the day, how does the author expect you to handle a micromanager who refuses to acknowledge your limits?
Right. The text addresses that exact friction point. The mathematical reality of your time hasn't changed, but the linguistic delivery has to change. So instead of a flat refusal, you agree to the request, but immediately introduce the constraint. You say, I can do this, but which of these other 3 projects should I pause?
Ah, I love that. It completely flips the dynamic. You maintain the posture of a willing professional by opening with, I can do this, which neutralizes their defensive reflex.
It does.
But then the second half of that sentence, asking what gets paused, it suddenly forces the manager to face the reality of finite resources.
Precisely. You are shifting the cognitive load of prioritization right back to them, because leadership often operates with asymmetrical information. Right? They know the absolute urgency of the new task they're handing you, but they are entirely blind to the aggregate weight of the 6 other tasks you're already managing.
They just have blinders on.
Yeah, when a manager drops a project on your desk, they are attempting to offload their own mental burden. If you accept it silently, you absorb that burden. If you say, I can't, you reject it, which causes conflict.
So by utilizing the trade-off, you aren't rejecting the burden at all. You're just requiring them to participate in the resource allocation. You're exposing the hidden costs of their request.
Exactly. You elevate yourself from a subordinate who just takes orders to a strategic partner requiring executive guidance. You are forcing leadership to make a leadership decision. And what the source data shows is that in many cases, when confronted with the actual trade-off, when they realize that advancing Project X means completely stalling Project Y, they will actually retract the request.
Because the urgency of the new task dissolves when it's weighed against existing initiatives. So grab your mental notepad and remember this rule. Never say, I can't. Always ask what gets paused.
But there is a vital prerequisite to this tactic that the source emphasizes. You really cannot bluff this maneuver. If you're going to ask what gets paused, you need a granular understanding of your own deliverables.
You have to have your act together.
Absolutely. It requires you to have an impeccable inventory of your current commitments so you can immediately present those 3 specific tangible projects that are on the chopping block. You cannot manage upward if you aren't managing your own desk with absolute precision.
Let's quickly recap. We've traded no for what gets paused, which leads us to our second point.
What's he?
Principle 2, the preemptive strike.
This one is fascinating because the text uses a highly specific sensory metaphor to illustrate the power dynamics at play.
The chess game metaphor.
Yeah. The author asks us to visualize a high-stakes game of chess, but focusing entirely on the physical sensation of it. Imagine sitting across the table from your opponent. You can feel the heavy weight of the carved mahogany piece in your hand. You can sense the tension in the room. And most importantly, you can hear the sharp, rhythmic ticking of the game clock just pressing down on your psychology.
It gives you that exact pit-in-your-stomach feeling of a corporate deliverable.
It really does. And the text makes a critical observation here. If you just sit back in your chair, remain silent, and wait for the other person to reach across the table and hand you a deadline, you are physically and psychologically backed into a corner. You are playing a purely defensive game.
You're allowing their anxiety and their uncalibrated expectations
Hmm.
to set the parameters of your reality.
Exactly.
You're surrendering the anchor. Because in behavioral economics, whoever introduces the first timeline into a negotiation anchors the rest of the conversation. If leadership says, I need this by Friday, Friday is now the gravitational center, any attempt to move it to next Wednesday feels like a concession.
Or worse, a failure on your part, which is exactly why the preemptive strike is so necessary. The text instructs you to lean forward, pick up your piece, and state the timeline first. You look at the assignment and immediately say, understood, I will have this fully executed and on your desk by next Wednesday.
You are defining the reality of the deliverable before they have the opportunity to conjure an unrealistic Friday expectation.
Yeah.
You set the board.
You set the board. And the psychological mechanism protecting you here is that most people in leadership are overwhelmed by their own decision fatigue. They don't actually want to micromanage your timeline. They just want the psychological safety of knowing the task is handled.
So when you confidently project a completion date, their brain accepts the anchor because it resolves their uncertainty.
Right. You claim the operational territory simply by having the conviction to define it first.
The text does present a major counter-argument here, and I want to push on it because it represents the reality for a huge portion of the workforce. The author brings up the scenario of the 204/7 client, the stakeholder who demands immediate responses at 9 o'clock on a Sunday night.
Right, the always-on expectation.
Exactly. The preemptive strike sounds highly effective in a structured corporate meeting. But how does the author justify attempting to dictate timelines to a client who believes their retainer buys uninterrupted access?
Well, the source approaches this objection with a very uncomfortable clinical truth. It argues that clients only demand 24/7 access because you have systematically trained them to expect it.
The Pavlovian conditioning angle.
Precisely. If a client sends a panicked, non-urgent email at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night and you respond to it to prove your dedication, you have just positively reinforced a boundary violation. You have taught them that your published working hours are merely suggestions.
You've demonstrated that their lack of foresight constitutes your immediate emergency. Every time you reward their intrusion with your attention, you're actively writing the behavioral code that guarantees they will do it again.
The text is crystal clear on this. The friction you're experiencing with clients is a monster of your own making.
But the text also claims this can be reversed, which honestly seems risky. If a professional has spent 2 years conditioning a client to expect midnight responses, suddenly enforcing a 9-to-5 boundary sounds like a recipe for getting fired. How does the source reconcile the risk of resetting those boundaries?
The author totally acknowledges there will be a volatile transition period. In behavioral psychology, when a previously rewarded behavior is suddenly unrewarded, you experience what's called an extinction burst. It's a temporary increase in the frequency and intensity of the demanding behavior.
So the client will push back harder at first because the midnight slot machine they're used to pulling isn't paying out anymore.
Exactly. They will test the structural integrity of the new boundary. But the source argues that the long-term psychological outcome of surviving that extinction burst is a massive increase in perceived value. It utilizes the concept that accessibility is inversely correlated with perceived expertise.
If you are endlessly available, you're viewed as a desperate order taker.
A commodity. But when you firmly and professionally reset the boundary, communicating that your time is scarce, structured, and reserved for high-level execution, you transition in their mind from a vendor to a high-value consultant. They ultimately respect the boundary because it signals confidence and operational competence.
Which leads us to the final principle. Out of the 11 tactics detailed in the original text, everything culminates in one overarching thesis regarding professional survival.
The absolute zero of the author's argument. People-pleasing is a catastrophic productivity killer.
I want to dissect the mechanics of this because corporate structures often actively reward compliance in the short term. The employee who says yes to every single request, who takes on the weekend work, who smooths over every friction point, they're usually praised as the ultimate team player.
Oh, absolutely.
It feels incredibly counterintuitive and frankly dangerous to abandon a strategy that frequently results in positive performance reviews.
It's a trap of short-term versus long-term incentive structures. The text argues that the corporate praise for endless compliance is a complete mirage.
Yeah.
Yes, saying yes to everything makes you popular in the immediate moment because you are absorbing everyone else's stress. But the math of finite time eventually catches up with you.
The denominator is fixed. You only have so many hours of deep cognitive focus available in a single week.
Exactly. If you are infinitely agreeable, you will eventually overcommit. It is a mathematical certainty. And the source tracks the cascade effect of that overcommitment. First, the quality of your deep work degrades because your attention is fragmented across way too many peripheral tasks. Then you begin missing deadlines because the sheer volume of obligations exceeds your physical capacity.
And that is exactly where the popularity you bought with compliance just evaporates.
Precisely. The paradox of the people pleaser, as defined by the text, is that in their desperate, anxiety-driven attempt to never let anyone down, they guarantee that they will eventually let everyone down.
And the resentment cycle begins. You resent the colleagues who keep handing you work, ignoring the fact that you never told them to stop. And your colleagues resent you for failing to deliver on the impossible promises you made. The harsh reality presented in the text is that if you try to bend over backward to make absolutely everyone happy, the only person you will ultimately disappoint is yourself.
The text frames this not just as a time management failure, but as a moral failing, disguised as a virtue. People-pleasing masquerades as kindness and collaboration, but the author argues it is fundamentally a lack of courage. It's the inability to tolerate the 10 seconds of interpersonal discomfort required to look someone in the eye and to say, no, I do not have the capacity for this.
The text issues a very firm mandate here. You must respect your own time first, because the market will never value your time more highly than you do.
If we look at the data surrounding the most highly effective, highly compensated individuals in any industry, they share a universal trait. They are fiercely protective of their cognitive bandwidth.
They understand their ability to produce meaningful work is directly correlated to the empty space they defend on their calendar. So write this final mnemonic down. Pleasing everyone equals disappointing yourself. Respect your time first.
And that requires a fundamental redefinition of what it means to be collaborative. Setting a boundary is not an act of hostility. The trade-off technique we analyzed earlier is a perfect example of this. You can say no to a timeline while still being immensely graceful, professional, and dedicated to the business's goals.
True collaboration requires honest communication about capacity, not silent compliance that leads to systemic failure.
Exactly.
So let's do a final GPS recap of the key tools you've just gained. First, we have the strategic friction of the trade-off technique. We're eliminating the defensive "I can't" and forcing the prioritization burden back onto leadership. Second, we have the preemptive strike. You stop waiting for the ticking clock, and you speak up to propose the timeline first, establishing the anchor, and finally you stop the productivity killer of people-pleasing.
Those are your defensive and offensive maneuvers for protecting your bandwidth. But the source material executes one final pivot that completely recontextualizes this entire conversation. Because ruthlessly negotiating your workload and hoarding your time is not the end goal. It is merely the prerequisite.
Right. Protecting your time is vital, but it's only the first step. The source text actually concludes with a highly specific directive. It tells its original audience to, quote, click the video on the screen to learn the financial automation rules to make your money work while you sleep. Now, obviously, we're deep diving on audio here and you can't click a screen, but that visual call to action is an intriguing artifact.
Yeah.
It points to the vital concept of leverage.
You do not deploy these persuasion tactics just to secure more time to sit idle. You protect your time so you can build scalable systems. You are constructing a moat around your daily schedule so that you can redirect that reclaimed bandwidth toward high-yield activities.
Whether that is financial automation, acquiring asymmetrical skills, or building assets that compound in the background.
Exactly. You are transitioning from active survival in the corporate hierarchy to passive growth and genuine independence.
If resetting your boundaries reclaims your time, the ultimate question the source leaves us with requires looking far beyond your current calendar.
It demands an analysis of opportunity cost. We constantly measure the immediate discomfort of saying no to a colleague or a client. But what is the opportunity cost of the yes you gave today? Are you continually sacrificing your future autonomy, your ability to build true leverage, just to avoid a momentary friction in the present?
What happens to the entire trajectory of your career when you finally stop playing defense with your schedule and start setting the board for your own life?
You've made it this far, so why stop now? There are 2 videos on your screen right now that are perfect for you. Just pick the one that looks most interesting and let's dive back in.